Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight's story is a descent into faith, silence, and the kind of devotion that isn't meant for God. Get comfortable, turn the lights down low, and if you're listening alone, maybe don't look toward the nearest door. Now let's begin. My vows were not something I stumbled into. Some girls wore white once and called it love. I wore it every day and called it obedience. I was 16 when I first felt the pull, quiet, strange, persistent. Nothing dramatic. No angels on rooftops. No visions. Just a certainty, bone deep, that my life belonged to something larger than myself. So I gave it. I learned how to shrink, how to quiet my wants, smooth my sharp edges, fold myself into the shape of service. By 24, I was Sister Agnes, young enough that the older sisters looked at me with that soft mix of pity and pride, as if I'd traded the world for a candle flame, and they weren't sure whether it was brave or foolish. When the letter came telling me I was being transferred, I thought it was a test. I expected something modest, a chapel on a hill, a parish squeezed between shops. Instead, the Mother Superior called me into her office and slid a single envelope across the desk without meeting my eyes. The wax seal was black, midnight black, glossy like oil, stamped with a symbol I didn't recognize. An archway over a key, circled by thorn-like lines. "Where is it?" I asked. She hesitated, just long enough for the silence to become a wait. "St. Verity," she said, "in the north." I knew the name the way you know the name of a ship that sank far from shore. Historic. Massive. The kind tourists photographed and locals crossed themselves near. The kind that survived wars, fires, plague, and kept its secrets anyway. Why me? My throat went dry. Her fingers tightened around her rosary. Because you are diligent, because you obey, because you pray as if prayer is a muscle you have trained. That doesn't answer. It's not a punishment, she snapped, then softened. It is a duty, a very old duty. She told me to pack lightly, to leave before dawn, and to remember that God's work was not always gentle. That night, listening to the wind in the convent's eaves, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation, not the good kind, the kind that sounds like a distant siren in your blood. The drive north took most of the day. The roads narrowed. The sky sagged low and gray. Bare trees clawed at the horizon. Towns thinned into long stretches of stone walls and tangled hedges. The driver, an older man sent by the diocese, spoke only when spoken to, and even then his answers were clipped. A small silver crucifix hung from the mirror, and he kept glancing at it like it might run away. "Have you been to St. Verity before?" I asked. "Once," he said. "And?" He swallowed. "It's cold. Churches are often cold." He shook his head. "Not like that." Near dusk, the road climbed into mist. Then, rounding a bend, St. Verity's appeared. It didn't sit in the landscape. It dominated it. dark stone walls stained by centuries of rain, buttresses jutting like ribs, tall arched windows staring down, their stained glass dulled to bruised color. And the spire, God, the spire, piercing the cloud like a spear. It wasn't built to invite the faithful. It was built to endure. In the courtyard, the air smelled of wet stone and something faintly metallic. Crows sat along the roofline, still as carved ornaments, watching the car as if they'd been waiting. The driver killed the engine and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for miles. "Stay close to the light," he muttered. I stepped out, and the cold hit me more than temperature. A pressure, as though the air itself disapproved of me. The great wooden doors opened before I touched them. A woman stood in the threshold, habit worn soft with years. Pale face, sharp, tired eyes. "Sister Agnes," she said. "Yes, I'm Sister Margaret. Come in." Inside, St. Verity did not smell like a church. No warm wax, no comforting incense. It smelled of damp stone, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, the sour-sweet rot of something sealed too long. The nave was immense, pillars rising like stone trees, arches webbing overhead. Stained glass depicted saints and angels in judgment, but the faces were wrong. Eyes too dark, mouths too thin. High above the altar, a figure stood with hands raised, not in blessing, but in surrender, and the glass around it was cracked like spider web. Sister Margaret caught me staring. "Don't linger on the windows," she said. "Why?" Her gaze flicked up, then away. "They catch things." She led me past chapels and confessionals. Candles burned in clusters, but the flames were small and tight, as if afraid. Carvings filled the stone locks, chains, keys, more restraint than grace. My room was simple, too clean, like a bed made for people who didn't stay long. "You'll follow our schedule," Sister Margaret said. "You'll pray when instructed. You will not go into the lower levels alone." Lower levels. The crypt. I swallowed. What's kept there? For a moment, I thought she might answer honestly. Instead, she said, "Something that must not be allowed to hunger." That night, I slept in fragments. The building groaned in its bones. Wind pressed against stained glass. And beneath it all, beneath my bed, beneath the floor, beneath the earth, breathing, slow, massive. I told myself it was pipes, air currents, an old building exhaling. But the rhythm was too deliberate. Then the breathing stopped. Silence expectant. A distant thud, like something shifting its weight. And faintly, nails dragging along stone. I prayed with my hands over my ears, not calm prayer, but the desperate kind you say when you're trying to convince yourself God is still in the room. The schedule at St. Verity's was strict, but wrong in subtle ways. We prayed in the nave, but never near the altar. We ate quickly in silence. There were 5 other sisters besides me, all older, faces worn with a specific exhaustion, like sleep never fully reached them. And every day, at precisely 3, all activity stopped. Sister Margaret rang a bell. The sisters gathered lanterns, a dark leather book, and a small metal bowl. Keys clinked softly in Sister Margaret's hand as she unlocked an iron-banded door marked with the archway end key symbol. Stone steps descended into darkness. "Stay close," she told me. The stairwell was narrow, damp, carved with locks and thorns, and chained circles. At the bottom, the passage opened into a low vaulted corridor where the air was heavier, blacker, colder. Breathing ahead, we walked to double doors of thick corroded metal etched with scripture that looked like Latin trying not to be Latin. The sisters formed a semicircle. The bowl was set down. The book opened. Sister Margaret began to chant. It wasn't a hymn. It wasn't any prayer I knew. It was low and rhythmic, a pattern that made my teeth ache. The other sisters joined, voices overlapping until the corridor filled with sound like smoke. The lantern flames leaned away from the doors. Behind the metal, something shifted. Skin against metal. A whisper, not words, just breath pushed through something that should not have breath. The whispering grew louder, as though it were trying to match their chant. Listening, learning. When the chant ended, Sister Margaret drew a small knife and cut her palm. Blood welled dark in lantern light and dripped into the bowl. The air trembled. Behind the doors, something inhaled deep, greedy. Then silence. "It is satisfied," Sister Margaret said. What is that?" My voice barely worked. "It is why this church exists." That night I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt those doors, the weight behind them, the way the air changed when blood touched metal. I found Sister Margaret kneeling before a statue of the Virgin Mary, shadows bruising her face. "Why blood?" I asked. "It must be reminded. It is not forgotten." "That doesn't. It answers enough," she snapped, then softened. "You were sent here without explanation. I know." "Why?" Her eyes were bloodshot. Beneath the exhaustion, fear. "Because we are dwindling," she said. "Because the ones who know how to do this work are dying. Because you are young and you listen." I listen to God. Sister Margaret's mouth twitched. "Do you think God is what hears us down there?" "What is it?" She stared at Mary as if asking permission. "We call it the guest." The word crawled over my skin. "Why?" "Because it arrived long ago. Because it does not belong. Because it cannot be made to leave. What happens if it isn't placated?" For the first time, she spoke with blunt honesty. Then St. Verity's becomes a mouth. After that, I noticed what I'd missed. The church wasn't just old, it was fortified. Iron bars behind doors, chains coiled in corners, corridors walled off with newer stone, and keys everywhere, carved, stamped, embroidered, hanging from necklaces like talismans. No one spoke about it openly, because to speak felt like inviting attention. On the 5th night, the bell rang deep and frantic. Sister Margaret appeared in the corridor, lantern shaking in her grip. "What is it?" I gasped. Her eyes were wide. "It's hungry." We ran to the crypt corridor. The air reeked of damp earth and something rotten sweet. The breathing behind the doors was fast, agitated. The sisters formed their semicircle and began the chant, louder this time, urgent. Something struck the metal, clang hard enough to rattle my bones. Sister Margaret cut her palm deeper. Blood dripped into the bowl. The breathing stuttered. Then a voice, clear, too close to be possible. "More." The corridor vibrated. Sister Margaret hissed. "Agnes, hold the bowl." I dropped to my knees, hands shaking, gripping the metal like it might bite. Blood fell faster. Another sister stepped forward and cut her palm too. Blood joined blood. The guest inhaled again. The doors stopped trembling. The pressure in the air eased like a hand, releasing a throat. When it ended, the bowl was half full of blood, and the way the surface trembled told me the air still moved toward the doors, as if drawn. When we climbed back up, Sister Margaret grabbed my wrist. "It talked," I said. "It learned," she corrected, haunted. "And that is worse." After that, St. Verity's felt attentive. Candle flames flickered without wind. Tapping came from walls like fingertips testing stone, and I began to dream of the doors open to a darkness like a throat, and a voice whispering my name, not Sister Agnes, just Agnes. When I woke, my mouth tasted like iron. Scratches appeared on my palms, thin lines like paper cuts. Sister Margaret stared at them too long and asked, "Do you sleepwalk?" "No." She nodded as if it didn't matter. At 3 one afternoon, as the sisters chanted, the words began to arrive in my mind, uninvited, sliding in like worms into soil. My lips moved. I started chanting too, but the sound that came from my throat was not my voice. Deeper, rougher, like something using me as an instrument. Behind the doors, the breathing stopped. A delighted sound, like laughter made without lungs. When it ended, I stumbled back, throat raw, tears in my eyes. "It is not allowed to know you," Sister Margaret hissed. "This place cares about doors." She looked at the metal. "And you are beginning to open." That night, I wandered the corridors, lantern in hand, looking for Sister Margaret answers anything. The church felt crowded even in silence, statues looming, eyes following. Then I saw an unmarked door in a side passage. Plain wood, no iron, no carvings. My lantern flame leaned toward it. I should have turned away. Instead, my hand reached, the handle colder than stone, and it turned easily. Behind it was a stairwell descending. The air that rose smelled like the crypt, stronger, mixed with old meat. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, and something in that click felt like a seal. The stairs twisted down like a throat. Murmuring rose, many mouths whispering at once. At the bottom, a corridor older than the ritual passage waited, rougher stone, lower ceiling, carvings that weren't scripture so much as warning. At its end was a warped wooden door, crossbarred with iron, keyhole in the center, the archway and key symbol carved above it. From behind the door, a whisper. "Agnes." My lantern trembled. "Agnes, come." Before I could stop myself, I answered, "Who are you?" The voice spoke inside my head. "I am kept. I am fed. I am prayed to." "No," I whispered. "We pray to God." A soft amusement. "You pray to what listens." My foot bumped metal. A ring of keys lay half hidden in shadow, new, bright, recently dropped or left. I snatched them and turned to run. At the top of the stairs, a nun stood in the lantern's distant glow, habit-soaked, as if pulled from a river. Her face was shadow, but her hands, too long, fingers like pale roots. She tilted her head. "Don't waste the keys," she said in a voice that wasn't human. "You'll need them." I ran. The wet figure didn't chase like a person. It moved like a shadow thrown by a flickering flame, here, then closer, then here again, always behind. Whispers swelled from the walls. I burst into the upper corridor and slammed the door. There was no lock, only the handle, shaking in my grip. Behind the door, something pressed, not hard enough to break through, just enough to remind me it could. Sister Margaret appeared at the far end, lantern raised, face like stone. Her eyes fell to the keys in my hand and filled with grief. "You went down," she said. "I didn't mean to. There was a door." "You heard it," she whispered, voice breaking. "You let it speak to you. It said my name." "Those keys," she said, "are not for opening doors." "Then what are they for?" "To close them." That was the night everything changed. Because once the guest had spoken to me directly, it didn't stop. It whispered in the hush between prayers, in the pause before sleep. Sometimes it used voices I loved, my mother, the Mother Superior, like hooks. On the 7th day, Sister Margaret locked us in the sacristy. "We have to tell you everything," she said. "It has touched you. If we don't, you will become a door." She opened a cabinet and unwrapped objects. A carved human femur etched with keys and thorns, a brittle book, a blackened bell whose clapper was a human tooth. "This church was not built for worship," she said. "It was built as a lock." Something came like a sickness in the earth, a thought that didn't belong. They sealed it below and founded an order not of worshippers, but of keepers. "To feed it," I whispered. "To keep it placated," she said, eyes shining. "At first, blood. And if blood isn't enough." She held up the bell. The tooth clicked faintly. "If blood isn't enough," she whispered, "it takes more living things." "Then why bring me here?" Sister Margaret's face broke. "Because it has been calling for someone younger," she whispered. "A voice that isn't worn out. A body that isn't already breaking." Her gaze nailed me in place. "Because it wants you." That night, the bell rang endlessly as if the church were screaming. We ran to the crypt corridor. The metal doors vibrated, etched words gleaming wetly like sweat. The sisters formed their semicircle, and began to chant. But the guest didn't whisper. It spoke, voice like stone scraping stone. No more. Sister Margaret spilled blood into the bowl. The guest inhaled, then laughed. Not enough. The doors bucked. Metal shrieked. The chanting fractured into panic. Agnes, Sister Margaret gasped. The keys. She pointed to an iron grate set into the floor, half hidden in shadow, carvings around it thick and frantic. Its opening from below. The grate rattled. Something pushed up beneath it, and inside my skull, a command. Open. My hands froze. I remembered the wet nothing. You'll need them. The keys weren't only for closing. They were for choosing which door stayed shut. Agnes, Sister Margaret shouted. I forced my hand to move, thrust a key into the grate's lock, and turned. The air screamed, not from metal, but from the building itself. The carvings glowed like hot iron. The grate slammed down, as if seized by a giant hand. Silence. Then the metal doors shuddered once more and went still. The guest exhaled, slow and displeased. Sister Margaret stared at me, as if seeing something new. You felt it, she whispered. The locks are changing. It's teaching you how. I don't want. It doesn't matter what you want, she said softly, and touched my cheek like a mother. Saint Verities only cares about who stays. After that, doors appeared where there had been walls. Cracks became seams. Seams became thresholds. The keys at my side felt heavier every day. On the 10th day, Sister Margaret pressed the leather book into my hands at the crypt doors. Read. I don't know the words. You do. And she was right. The chant came out of me as if it had lived there forever. The doors seemed to lean toward my voice. When it ended, Sister Margaret whispered, It's placated. But the guest didn't whisper to her. It spoke to me. Good girl. The final truth came on the 13th night. I woke to a silence so complete it stuffed my ears. Then barefoot footsteps in the corridor, soft slaps on stone. They paused at my door. Fingernails tested wood. A whisper slid under the crack. Agnes, come down. I whispered no. You don't have to be afraid, it coaxed. You can stop being small. You can open. Something clicked inside my mind, like a latch sliding loose. I flung my door open, lantern shaking. The corridor was empty, but far down the hall, a faint glow waited. Lantern light. Sister Margaret stood at the iron-banded door to the crypt stairs, keys in hand, tears on her face. I can't do it anymore, she whispered. What are you doing? It promised, she said, glassy-eyed, that it would stop if I opened it, that it would let me sleep. It lies, I pleaded. It doesn't matter, she whispered. I'm so tired. I heard the guest, delighted. Let her. I lunged and grabbed her wrists. The keys fell, clattering like teeth. For a heartbeat, she trembled beneath my hands, her, still in there. Then her face changed, instantly. Eyes rolled back. Mouth opened wider than it should. A voice poured out of her throat deep, layered, wrong. You will open for me. Whatever wore her bent with spine-cracking slowness and gathered the keys. The door behind her seemed to throb with cold. She slid a key into the lock and turned it. Click, small sound, but the church responded like a living thing, stabbed stone groaning, dust falling, stained glass cracking further as if flinching. The iron-banded door swung inward and cold poured out, thick enough to fog the air. It smelled of damp earth, ancient rot, and something sour and animal. Sister Margaret descended barefoot, reverent as a bride. I chased her down twisting stairs into the ritual corridor. The metal doors at the end were open, not wide, just enough. Darkness inside them exhaled, a low, hungry breath that made my teeth vibrate. Sister Margaret walked to the gap and bowed her head. "We kept you so long," she whispered. From within came a purr of satisfaction. A pale surface pressed toward the opening, smooth in places, textured in others like skin stretched over coral. It slid against the metal, and the metal hissed as if burned. "Agnes," the voice inside my skull murmured, "come closer." I stepped forward despite myself, lantern shaking. The darkness wasn't empty. It was layered, smoke shapes folding and unfolding. And among them were faces. Human faces. Not saints. Keepers. Women pressed into that darkness, the way glass holds color. Sister Margaret whispered, "I'm so tired." The darkness breathed in. The corridor's air pulled forward, tugging at my habit, my hair, my lungs. Sister Margaret stepped into the opening and vanished, swallowed as if the dark were a throat. A distant, wet crunch came from below, followed by a long exhale that felt like laughter. I gagged, sobbing, stumbling backward. "See," the voice soothed. "She was only a lullaby. You are the song." The faces in the dark turned toward me in unison, and they whispered, almost tender, "Agnes, Agnes, Agnes." I fled toward the stairs, but the corridor stretched, blurred, as if the church were lengthening the walk just to enjoy it. My lantern dimmed like the air was starving it. Something cold and wet brushed my ankle. I screamed and kicked, stumbling, and the lantern swung, light flashing over figures half pressed out of the stone walls, habit soaked, mouths moving in silent prayer. Their hands didn't claw. They guided. They ushered. At last, the stairs snapped close again. I sprinted up and slammed the iron-banded door shut behind me. A lock existed now. A heavy bolt on the outside, new or newly revealed. I shoved it into place. Silence, then a gentle press against the other side of the door, like a palm. The whisper side, so close, so stubborn. I ran through corridors searching for the others and found the church empty. Dining hall clean. Beds made. No sisters, not even the ones who had chanted. In the vast nave, stained glass looked less like saints and more like people trapped behind colored wounds. The highest window above the altar pulsed faintly. Then the bell rang. slow, measured, counting, summoning. I ran to the main entrance. The huge doors wouldn't open. The handle turned, but the door stayed shut like it had become part of the wall. You can't leave a mouth, the voice murmured. Not when you're the tongue. The floor vibrated with a low hum like a distant choir. The candles flared, every flame bending toward me. St. Verity wasn't just a building. It was a mechanism, a lock made of stone and glass and blood and devotion. My lantern went out. Darkness flooded my sight. Then the stained glass began to glow, saints, eyes lighting like embers. The highest window brightened. The figure with raised hands moved. Its mouth opened, and a whisper poured down like rain. Keep it placated. That voice wasn't the guest. It was many voices braided together, exhausted, resigned. Keepers, help me, I whispered. There is no help, the glass whispered back. Only duty. The bell tolled again from below. Part of me wanted to go, not the part that feared, the part trained to obey. I staggered to the side chapel with the statue of Mary, desperate for somewhere that might still hold something holy. I fell to my knees. Mother of God, please. The chapel door closed by itself. Locked from the outside. The whisper in my head turned affectionate. You came to pray. Good, pray for me. The candles leaned toward the statue. Mary's stone, eyes darkened like ink, seeping into marble. Her lips cracked and widened into a smile. The voice that came from her mouth was soft, sweet, wrong. Agnes, you are not her, I whispered, clutching my rosary until beads bit my skin. The smile widened. Who do you think she has been praying to all this time? The statue's face rippled Mary, then Sister Margaret, then my mother, then me, my own face smiling empty from stone. The voice hardened. You will open. I shut my eyes and prayed the raw prayers of childhood, the ones without performance, without duty, just trembling sincerity. The statue chuckled, delighted. You can't pray me away, it whispered. You have been feeding me since you learned to speak. The rosary slipped from my shaking hands and clacked to the floor. The beads rolled by themselves toward the statue, as if pulled. That was when I understood. I couldn't win by resisting the church. I had to break the mechanism. The lock. Sister Margaret had shown me the cabinet in the sacristy, objects tied to this place's function. If I could destroy them, maybe the lock would stutter. Maybe it would fail in a way that didn't end with me inside glass. I had the keys. My fingers found a key, forced it into the chapel lock. It turned. The door swung open, and cold air rushed in, angry. I ran. The corridors shifted as I moved, doors appearing where walls had been, shadows thickening. But I found the sacristy. The cabinet stood open, as if waiting. The carved bone, the brittle book, the blackened bell with the tooth. I grabbed them, arms full, and ran to the kitchen. A small iron stove, a tin of lamp oil, blessed ordinary practicality. I poured oil over the book, the bone, the bell. The whisper inside my skull screamed, "No." It wasn't a plea. It was a command that blurred my vision. I forced my lantern closer. The oil caught. Fire blossomed. Relief surged hot wild. Then every candle in the building went out at once. Darkness slammed down like a lid. The fire didn't die. It changed. The flames turned pale, bone pale, rising without heat, flickering silently. Within them, I saw faces pressed into flame, mouths open in soundless screams. The bell rang by itself, tooth clapper clicking, clicking, clicking. The pale flames crawled across the counter with intention, reaching toward me. "You don't break a lock by burning the keyhole," the voice snarled. I ran, slamming the kitchen door, but the ringing followed through walls like a heartbeat. I didn't know where I was going until the nave opened before me, lit not by candles, but by moonlight pouring through stained glass. But the moonlight was wrong. Thick, tangible, pooling on the floor like spilled milk. In the center aisle stood the other sisters, all in a line, hands folded, heads bowed. Too still, bare feet planted on stone. Above them, the highest window had changed. Not surrender anymore. An archway, a keyhole, and behind it, darkness. Breathing, the sisters lifted their heads in unison, eyes black as holes. Their mouths opened, and a layered voice spoke through them. "Agnes, come take your place." The nave doors slammed shut behind me with a thunderclap. The moonlight on the floor began to crawl toward my feet. My shoes stuck. I tore free with a wet sound and stumbled back as the sisters' voices rose, chanting now, not soothing, but summoning. Stained glass brightened, colors bleeding into the air like smoke. The keyhole shape expanded. The whisper in my skull became a chorus. "Open, stay, feed." The moonlight surged up my ankles, cold, biting like teeth. I reached for my rosary. Gone, dropped in the chapel. Only the keys remained. Keys to close doors, keys to choose. My palm tightened around them, so hard it split. Blood ran warm down my fingers. I held it up like refusal. "I don't belong to you," I said, and my voice shook with something I'd never allowed myself to feel: rage. The chant stuttered. The moonlight trembled. "You are mine," the voice hissed. "No," I whispered. "I was only convenient." The church shuddered. The stained glass flickered. The voice turned seductive again. "You vowed obedience. You promised to kneel." "Yes," I said, tasting ash. "But I promised to God." Then I spoke the simplest truth, the one my fear had avoided. "This is God." The air changed, not safer, but clearer, like fog lifting just enough to reveal the cliff edge. The darkness behind the stained glass recoiled slightly, offended. The sisters, chanting, shattered into a wail. Moonlight slammed into my legs, climbing, pain like frost peeling skin. I stumbled toward the altar, forcing movement through clinging light. Near the altar stood an iron candlestick, heavy. I grabbed it. I looked up at the highest window and understood with sudden, terrible clarity. It was another door. A door made of attention and belief. A door fed by prayers. If I shattered it, shattered the shape, it might cut the guest on its way through. I swung. The candlestick hit stained glass with a crack like lightning. Colored shards exploded outward like teeth. The church screamed, stone groaning, pillars trembling, dust raining down. I swung again. More glass shattered. The keyhole shape splintered. Behind it, the darkness surged forward and tore on the jagged edges, not like flesh, like fabric ripping. A sound like reality shredding filled the nave. The sisters collapsed one by one, habits crumpling to stone. The moonlight convulsed and retreated like something burned. The whisper in my skull became hunger made audible. The darkness surged once more, then recoiled violently, yanked backward. The stained glass dimmed. Saint's eyes went dark. Silence fell hard. Then the bell rang once, above this time, not below. Final. I dropped the candlestick and collapsed, gasping. Moonlight streamed through the broken window, ordinary now, illuminating drifting dust. No breathing. No poolsing dark. Just night. I thought it was over. I was wrong. A thud came from beneath the floor. Then another. Then nails scraping stone. The crypt. It wasn't gone. Only pushed. Angered. Hungry in a new way. I staggered to the fallen sisters. They were alive, pulse weak. But there, whatever had worn them had loosened, but the church was shifting again. Doors slamming in distant corridors. A building rearranging itself like a puzzle. I stumbled to the main entrance and shoved. This time it moved. A crack opened. Outside air slipped in cold, wet, blessedly ordinary. I shoved harder, and the doors groaned open. I fell into the courtyard, rain misting my face. Crows burst from the roofline, a storm of wings. Behind me, St. Verity's loomed. The broken window glinted like a jagged smile. In a lower window, something pale slid against the inside of the glass, leaving condensation like breath. Letters formed in the fogged pane. Agnes. My stomach dropped. I ran down the hill, mist swallowing the church behind me. But I could still feel its attention like a hand between my shoulder blades. The road led into a small village of stone cottages and dark windows. Too quiet. I pounded on doors. No answer. The whisper in my skull returned, amused. You broke a window, it murmured. You didn't break me. And then I realized the worst part. The voice was still in my head. The guest didn't need stone doors anymore. It had already learned the path. It had me. I ran again and found, at the village's edge, a small chapel, humble, newer stone, a simple cross above the door. I burst inside. Warmth, wax, old wood, a quiet that didn't feel watchful. I collapsed before the altar, and whispered one small prayer. "Please." The whisper hissed like a disturbed snake. The candle flames flickered, then steadied. A warmth settled in my chest, not miraculous, just solid, as if something placed a hand on my shoulder. For the first time in days, the guest's presence pulled back. Not gone, but held at the edges. I stayed there until dawn without sleeping, listening to my own breathing. When the village finally woke, people found me stunned. Officials came. Priests. Questions circled the truth, but never touched it. They called Sister Margaret's disappearance death, because it was easier than numbing what took her. St. Verity's was sealed for repairs. Chains, boards, warning signs. I watched from the road and knew none of it mattered, because even miles away, I could still feel that slow, patient breathing beneath stone. They sent me back to my convent. Rest, they said, pray. Trauma, they said, stress. I tried to return to the shape of my old life. But once you've been used as a door, you never forget the hinge. Some nights I wake with iron on my tongue. Some nights I hear nails dragging stone, not beneath my bed, but inside my skull. Sometimes my prayers twist into words I don't remember learning. And when I look at stained glass too long, I see faces shift behind it, women, not saints, mouths moving in silent pleas. One face always pressed closest, Sister Margaret, her eyes wide, her lips forming words I can't hear, but I know what she's saying, because the guest whispers it in my quiet moments like a promise. St. Verity's is hungry again. The first time I heard that, I hid in the chapel until sunrise. The second time, I told the Mother Superior. She went pale. She prayed over me. She called it temptation, trauma, the devil. But her hands shook, and she didn't meet my eyes. Because deep down, she knew what she'd done when she sent me there. She had offered me up, not to God, to a lock that needed fresh hands. A younger voice. 3 weeks after my return, another letter arrived. Black wax, the archway and key. My blood ran cold. The Mother Superior kept it in her office for an hour before calling me in. Her face looked older. "They're asking for you," she whispered. "I can't go back," I said. "I won't." Her eyes shone with tears. "Agnes, it has started speaking again, to villagers, to priests, to children." She swallowed hard. "It's learning new doors." The whisper inside my skull purred at those words. I pressed my palm to my chest, as if I could hold my soul in place. "We can't let it become a mouth," she whispered. "Not again." I looked down at my hands, at the faint scars that never fully healed, thin lines like keys pressed into skin. I understood the final cruelty of St. Verity. It didn't just keep something trapped. It trained people to trap themselves. It turned devotion into a chain you willingly held. And the worst part, the part that makes me sick to confess, is that beneath fear and rage and horror, there is still that trained instinct, that vow, that obedience, a part of me that hears duty and wants to kneel. The whisper slid in, tender as a kiss. Come home. I closed my eyes, and I prayed not to the guest, not to the church, but to the simplest truth I had left. Give me the strength to choose, because if I go back to St. Verity's, I don't know if I'll return as Sister Agnes or as the thing that learns my voice well enough to speak through it. And if you ever see St. Verity's, if you ever find yourself driving north up a misty road and you see a dark spire piercing the clouds, don't go inside. Don't touch the doors. Don't stare at the stained glass too long. And if you hear your name whispered from beneath stone, run, because some churches aren't built to worship. Some are built to keep the hunger sleeping. And hunger, once it learns a name, never forgets it. And that's where I'm going to end tonight's story. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to leave a like. It really helps the channel reach more listeners. And if you're new here and want more original horror narrations, subscribe to Whispers in the Dark and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. Let me know in the comments what you think was really kept beneath St. Verity's, and whether you believe Agnes will go back by choice, or because the lock has already decided for her. Until next time, sleep tight, and whatever you do, don't answer when the dark says your name.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of